In the 1300s, European feudalism went into crisis because of a pandemic and climate change. These two crises greatly upset the balance of power and wealth in the Middle Ages. To restore their wealth and power, Europe's wealthy began to experiment. They started by colonizing islands and forcing the people who lived there to work, growing and harvesting sugar, cutting down forests for energy, and mining gold and silver. When those people died, they enslaved and imported Africans to replace them. Slavery required boats, which required lumber, metal, sails, and navigation. These needs created growth in mining, textiles, and required a new attitude toward nature and resources. Slavery created so many jobs in Europe and North America and fueled such economic growth that it became the bedrock of a new way of life organized around jobs and money rather than human needs. Before Africans were enslaved, people around the world lived off common lands and created their own subsistence by cooperating with each other and nature. Because a life organized around money didn't make sense to people, they had to be forced to stop cooperating and take jobs. The European aristocracy enclosed their common lands and cut off the peasants' ability to provide for themselves, making them dependent on money. To force those who resisted jobs, beggars' laws were passed and police were invented to enforce them. In 1572, it became law in Britain that those convicted of begging for the first time would be burned through the ear, and persistent beggars were to be hanged. In response to these punishments, European peasants began to accept the normalcy of jobs, money, and wage labor. To survive, they began organizing their lives around the economy and also stopped trusting their inner voice that told them that this change wasn't normal. Before jobs were normal, women around the world practiced various forms of herbal birth control and infanticide without controversy. To make sure women produced children who would become workers, they outlawed birth control and accused all midwives and women who continued practicing it of witchcraft and burned them alive. This became known as the witch hunts, and after several years of women being killed for exerting control over their own bodies, to survive, they stopped passing this knowledge down and stopped trusting their inner wisdom. Thanks to the wealth created by the death of indigenous Americans, the enslavement of Africans, the jobs that slavery made possible, control over women's reproductive capacity, and energy for industry made possible by dominating nature, Europe and what became the United States became wealthy, urban, and modern. Rather than acknowledge that this great wealth and new way of life was made possible by violence, Europeans called these developments the Enlightenment. Over a period of almost 200 years, violent systems of slavery, wage labor, control over women, and control over nature developed and connected to each other and gradually transformed into white supremacy, jobs, women's work, and progress. From these relationships, something much bigger emerged. A system of patriarchal racial capitalism that has allowed us to master flight, create electricity, create the internet, and brought us to the edge of extinction from climate change. It has provided us with amazing technological advancements, but it hasn't taught us how to live with each other. We've learned to act like the money needed for survival is more important than actually surviving. We've learned to ignore our inner wisdom.